from the United States of America.
Hi, you have reached the Decahedron RPG Cast feedback line. Just start talking at the sign of the tone.
Hey guys, Jason here. So I'm actually on vacation. We rented a beach house in Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina, but I had to sneak away from the family to listen to your show and call in. I haven't been listening to podcasts this week, so, but you guys are special. And I wanted to say that I totally agree with James that Fat Dragon was the worst thing in that movie. I would have very happily not seen Fat Dragon in the movie. As far as Sorceress being the worst fantasy film ever made, no, sir. You are woefully mistaken on that. Now, what is the worst fantasy movie ever made? That's a good question. I am not a good person to give favorite movies and least favorite movies because, you know, it can vacillate day to day to day. In the past, I've said that Excalibur is my favorite fantasy movie. Now, I separate fantasy from sword and sorcery. But for me, Excalibur definitely falls into fantasy as opposed to sword and sorcery. And well, Excalibur may or may not be my favorite fantasy movie day to day, but it's definitely up there. So I'm happily willing to throw Excalibur out as one of the best of the fantasy movies. Now, as far as the worst fantasy movies, I would say a lot of this direct-to-streaming stuff you can find it on the various streaming platforms like Amazon. There's a bunch of movies that have come out, you know, in the last 10 years or so that are direct-to-streaming, just CGI, bad CGI fests. And they don't have any heart, and they're poorly acted, and I would say those are the worst. I mean, there's a pair of great things in Sorceress that rise it above that. And Sorceress also, you know, and all the Corman movies get by on the so bad it's good and do I believe what I just saw and silliness. They're not good movies. They definitely don't belong up there as good movies, but they're definitely not the worst things ever made. Some are worse than others. You know, when we look at the Deathstalker movies that are very rapey movies, especially the first one, that's a little tough. Now, it's saved a little bit by Deathstalker 2 because that is a parody of the first movie. And it's kind of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, where they're kind of making fun of the genre. Well, they do that with Deathstalker 2, which makes it pretty fun. Of course, that was a Jim Wynorski movie, which explains that. As far as modern streaming and TV, you guys watch, or at least Joe and the wife watch a lot more than I do. So because I don't recognize a lot of things you said about.
That was Jason from the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, a great podcast. Links are in the show notes. Check it out. Hey, Jason, thanks for that. And thanks very much for saying that we are special enough to give us a call and to listen to on your vacay. So I really appreciate that. That really touches me. Thanks for that. I wrote down some notes here. So first thing you said you were in Kill Devil Hills. Did I hear that right? Is that really the name? That's a very D&D name. I could picture that being a town somewhere in Greyhawk. Do you really have to kill a devil to go there? All these questions that are brought to mind. Anyway, the Fat Dragon. It's perfectly fine to agree with James. James is right on some things. And it's okay to agree with him on this, but you're not really disagreeing with me. At no point, if you listen back to what I said, at no point did I say that, no, you misunderstand, James. The Fat Dragon was great and wonderful, and it was awesome. All I said was, I think what they were trying to do was to invoke that silliness that sometimes happens at the table, and that's all I said. I do agree, although I didn't say it in the episode, I do agree that that scene could have been cut out and nothing would have been lost or missed. Other than you wouldn't have had a dragon, and it can't be Dungeons and Dragons without A, a dungeon, and B, a dragon. And so that was them checking that little box. Next thing you said was, actually, I'm not going to order here because you said a lot about sorceress, and so I'm going to have a lot to say about that. You say that you separate fantasy and sword and sorcery. I don't. I think it's a superset subset type thing. I think Swords and sorcery is a type of fantasy, like high fantasy is a type of fantasy and low fantasy. And actually, I would even say that sword and sorcery is a form of low fantasy. I would put that in there. And then there's light fantasy. I'm a big fan of light fantasy. Things like Robert Asprin with the Myth series, or John Morrissey with the Hedrigging series. Yeah, I like those. I like to laugh while I read my fantasy. So yeah, I consider fantasy to be the big umbrella that encompasses all these sub things. As for Excalibur, when Excalibur came out, again, we're a little older than you. So when Excalibur came out, it was playing in the theaters. And like I mentioned before, a couple of my friends in high school worked at the movie theater. So we saw everything that came out over and over and over again. And it also had the bad timing to occur while I was reading Mallory, Le Morte d'Arthur. And I mentioned it before, as a kid, I was a bit stuck up and a bit snobbish and ever so arrogant. And in my mind, if it wasn't in Mallory, it wasn't Arthur. So when Excalibur came out, I compared it to Mallory and it fell woefully short. And so I was very much against it. And I think I have the memory of saying that it's a good fantasy film, but it is not Arthur, and therefore it sucks. If they called it something else, it would have been a great movie. This is a distant memory, but I think I said something like that. I haven't seen it since, so I can't say what I would think of it in my modern thoughts. I'm still a huge fan of Arthurian myth as I've grown and learned since high school, through college and all my own studies and everything, that, Mallory was just one other link in a long chain of tellings of the Arthurian tale. He's not the Holy Grail, ha ha ha, to hold up as the source of what's true and pure for Arthurian myth. So I would be willing to watch it again in new light and see what I thought. But yeah, that was my thought of it at the time. Now, Sorceress. Okay. I am going to stand by my statement that Sorceress is the worst fantasy movie of all time. You, well, first of all, you said that there's a pair of things in there, by which I imagine you're invoking the Harris twins, maybe. Um, I didn't think they were particularly great actresses. I'm trying to remember their performance. It wasn't very good from what I remember. And the other thing you said is that you said, there's a lot of things worse out there on streaming. The thing is, Sorceress was a theatrical release. I saw Sorceress in the movie theater. Me, my friend Ricky, and another friend Gail, and another friend Dave. I thought there was somebody else there. Anyway, we were sitting around somebody's apartment and we were like, huh, we should see a movie tonight. What's playing? And in those days, you opened up the newspaper, right? And so we opened up to the movie section of the newspaper and we saw, oh, Sorcerer sounds like fantasy. And so we went there. And that is the first movie that that I ever considered actually walking out of. If I were alone, I probably would have. Yeah, it was just bad. So I say theatrical releases are one level, and straight to video, straight to streaming is a whole different level. Made for TV, it's all a different level. For movies, theatrical fantasy movies, Sorceress is the worst movie ever. And do I even need to mention the fact that there is no sorceress in the movie named Sorceress? Anyway, um, you of course are allowed to enjoy it and like it and whatever, but you will not sway me that that is not the worst fantasy movie that I have ever seen. But thanks for your call. Bye.
My last thought before I was cut off was that I don't watch a lot of modern streaming TV. So hopefully that got caught up. And I think I gave you a spectrum of movies that I would call the worst fantasy. And I gave you a candidate for the best fantasy. I complimented James. And I guess the other thing would be, Joe, who is your favorite Jack Ryan? Is it Harrison Ford or is it Alec Baldwin? That's the question.
Hey again, Jason. Yeah, so Jason's message went long. Gmail, right. Google Voice cuts you off at 3 minutes, and I guess he went over that. Yeah, I never addressed my best. If you were to ask me what was the best fantasy movie ever, hands down, not even a moment's hesitation, Princess Bride, no argument. Nope. Best fantasy movie ever. That's not to say it's perfect. There are some scenes I don't like. I don't like Miracle Max. You could take that whole thing out of there. I would be happy. There's some other things here and there, but on the whole, best fantasy movie ever. You also ask who my favorite Jack Ryan is. This might come as a surprise to you because you said you don't watch streaming. So I'm going to say it's John Krasinski, who isn't anyone that you mentioned. You might know John Krasinski. He played Jim in The Office, Jim and Pam. He was Jim. He's also the director of A Quiet Place and A Quiet Place 2 with his real life wife. He starred in that. And on streaming on Amazon Prime, he plays Jack Ryan in the series called Jack Ryan. And so he is actually my favorite Jack Ryan. And it could just be as simple as being in a television series format. You have more time to explore and interact with the character as a viewer and to develop that attachment. And if you told me, like back when The Office was a thing, that Jim was going to be playing Jack Ryan, I would be laughing. But no, he got all buffed up and everything. So it's pretty impressive. And he is my favorite. But just to go down the list, John Krasinski, Harrison Ford, Alec Baldwin. I think I will give it to Chris Pine over Ben Affleck. I think. Um, but they're really close there. But yeah, I think I will go Chris Pine then Ben Affleck. But overall, I would say it's a tie. Thanks for the call.
Hey, this is Jason. Just want to say I enjoyed the latest Feedback episode. Yeah, it's interesting because the points of light thing has been used in other games as well. The idea of isolated pockets of civilization and, Badlands or Wilderness or Demon Ground or whatever in between. Was it FASA or Games Workshop? Whoever did Twilight 2000, they also had a game called, well, now I'm forgetting the name of the game. What was it? Dark Conspiracy. Dark Conspiracy, which used the Twilight 2000 rule set, also used that kind of idea in a slightly future America where the cities were kind of isolated and there were demon grounds, dangerous areas between the cities, and evil was lurking in, and, we had pulled back our focus, and now NASA didn't go to the stars, but NASA had investigators investigating aliens/demons, all that. A really, really interesting setting. But it's a modern setting that also uses that points of light idea.
And thank you for that one, Jason. So first of all, it was GDW, Game Designers Workshop, the people that made Traveler. They're the ones that made Twilight 2000. I often wonder if it's actually a continuum, right? You have Twilight 2000, then you had Traveler 2300, and then Traveler. So I always wondered if it was supposed to be the same universe. Yeah, you mentioned several examples of games using points of light concept. And yeah, I wasn't saying that I was unfamiliar with the concept. I was saying that the term points of light to refer to that concept, I just hadn't heard before. And that was what was new for me. I don't think Twilight 2000 called it points of light. It's hard for me to say because I had Twilight 2000, the first edition when it came out. And I lent it to this guy who worked in the x-ray section of the dental lab at RAF Upper Hayford, where I worked at the time. And then he ended up getting a medical discharge and left. I never saw him or my book again. Do I sound a little bitter about that? Anyway, speaking of Traveler, as I said in the last feedback episode, right, I used to do this type of campaign. That was the default for most role playing games, right? Village, vast wilderness, little village, vast wilderness, big city, vast wilderness, until I read that S. John Ross article, Medieval Demographics Made Easy, where he talks about how silly and unrealistic that is. Because if you have a big city, you need, he does all the math to tell you how many acres of land you need feeding that, and then how many farmers you need farming those acres of land to feed that city, right? And so he says that what we'll call points of light is unrealistic and it doesn't work. And so then that's why I furthermore said in the last episode, yeah, I like just enough sense to suspend disbelief, but don't go looking too deep because it will all fall apart. And as I've said many times throughout the show, my modern take on things is fun versus reality. Take fun almost every time. Part of the reason I started coming back to this type of campaign was not only for the fun reason, but I was trying to recreate the feeling of Traveler because I find Traveler to be a very satisfying, happy gameplay experience. So recreating that in a fantasy setting. In Traveler, it's built in, right? Because you have a planet and then you have another planet, and there's no way to go from one to the other except with a spaceship. And so I was just trying to recreate that feeling, and that's where that all came from. Yeah, that is all I have to say about that. Thanks for the call, Jason. Hey, everyone. That's all the calls we had this week. It was 3 calls, all of them from Jason. If you want to hear your voice or if you want to hear your thoughts, please send them to us. You can call us. You can write to us. All the information is in the show notes. All the information is at decahedron.com. All the information is spoken to you in the outro music that you are about to hear any moment now. Last thing I'm going to say is please remember time is winding down. This episode is dropping on Friday. On Wednesday is the last day for your entries to come in. Send us by any of those methods what your favorite gaming related book is. It can be either a non-rule book about gaming. It can be a gaming rule book. It can be a non-gaming book completely, and it just gives you inspiration for what to do in your game or whatever. Do all of that. You will be entered in. We will be picking one of those completely at random, and you will win a copy of Through Dungeons Deep, which is this really neat little 1980s book that James and I both love. And it's a fantasy gamer's handbook. And it's just a bunch of neat little articles, very old school in its feel. Even if you don't like that style of play, it's interesting as a read to look back to see what was happening in 1980 and gamers' thoughts and everything. It's kind of cool. So anyway, yeah, you're running out of time. Please send in those entries. We've received 2 so far, so there you have like a 50-50 shot. If you join, you might even have a 33% shot. If you want to join, but you're not interested in the prize, that's fine. Let me know. We'll work something out. We'll find a charity to donate or something that we both agree on. Anyway, thanks again for listening. Wednesday's episode is going to be, it's going to be an interview with Heather and Keith, sort of the part 2 of Intro to a New Gamer, I think. And I say that because we recorded it while they were up here visiting me, and I was listening to it, and I only had one mic to share for the 3 of us. I'm not sure the audio is going to work. I sound mostly okay. Keith sounds really great. Heather is kind of on the verge of audibility, so I don't know if I can salvage it and edit or not. But if not, James and I will be recording something. I'll do a rush edit to get it out in time. So that's all I have. I'm ending it now. So until Wednesday, happy gaming, happy life. Bye. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Decahedron RPG Cast. We'd love to hear from you. You can leave us a voice message by calling 562-774-2278. That's 562-RPG-CAST. Or by visiting sayhi.chat/decahedron. You can also email us at feedback@decahedron.com. Links are in the show notes. For more information, visit decahedron.com. Remember that Decahedron is spelled with a K. Music is by Kevin MacLeod. Logos by Design Cat. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, keep those dice rolling.